Hi everyone, I'm Mark Harrison and this is a history of Rome. Last time we saw how the Romans and the Equi had continued to clash and how, despite coming under pressure from the invaders, the city of Antium had stayed loyal to Rome. We also saw the first recorded passing of a Senatus Consultum Ultimum. The conflict of the orders flared up once more with a failed attempt by a plebeian tribune to have the powers of the consuls legally defined, and there was the arrival of a new folk hero, Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus. Let's continue. For the next few years things were relatively quiet in Rome. There was little threat from hostile neighbours, and the ongoing fight for plebeian rights had reached a stalemate. By 454 BC, after 8 years of facing patrician blocking tactics, the plebeian tribunes finally gave up on their attempts to push through the Lex Terentilia. They turned instead to a new tactic. They asked the Senate to consent to the setting up of a commission to look into and enact laws that would secure equality between the orders. Somewhat surprisingly, the Senate agreed, but only with the caveat that all the members of this commission were patricians and not the equal split between plebeians and patricians that the lower class had looked for. But at least the commission had been accepted, and so the plebeians readily agreed to the condition. To begin the process, the Senate first sent 3 envoys to the Greek city of Athens in order to study the details of their Solonian constitution and the laws pertaining to it. This constitution had been devised in the early 6th century BC by Solon to solve a problem that Athens had then had between the classes, and was thus regarded by the Romans as setting a type of precedent for their own situation. The envoys spent 2 years away from Rome studying the manuscripts. Upon their return, the Senate agreed to go ahead with the setting up of a body of legislators. The debate surrounding the constitution was long, but eventually agreement was reached. As a first step, it was decided that both the consulship and the plebeian tribunate would be suspended, with all members being forced to resign their positions immediately. In their place, a panel of 10 men, the decemviri, would be set up. They would inherit all consular powers, but unlike the consuls, their decisions would not be subject to appeal. The plebeians, probably mindful of patrician treachery in the past, obtained a legal guarantee that no plebeian laws passed could be repealed before consenting to the formation of the decemvirate, being comprised solely of patricians. By 451 BC, the first decemvirate was in place. In order to compensate those consuls who had been required to step down, they were included in the 10, one of whom, Appius Claudius Crassus, was soon to become notorious. To begin with though, the rule of the decemviri was, according to Livy, very fair. Each day one of the 10 would act as a president of the council, for which he would be assigned a body of 12 lictors, and this presidency would be rotated on a daily basis. Throughout each sitting, they would debate which laws they thought were required. Once an agreement between them had been reached, they would put together a draft proposal which they then presented to the people, who were encouraged to give comment and propose any amendments that they thought necessary. The council would then incorporate any amendment as appropriate before finally committing the proposal into law. And so, as the council's term of office drew to a close, they had managed to complete a new set of laws, all written upon 10 bronze tables. The whole process had been a great success, but concerns were raised that the work was, as of yet, unfinished. Many agreed that 2 more tables would be required, and towards that end it was deemed necessary that a second decemvirate would be appointed the following year. But this second decemvirate shared little in character with its predecessor. Unlike the first, which was built around trust and the burial of old prejudices, this new one fell prey to the cutthroat nature of Roman politics. It was under the suspicion of vote rigging that Appius Claudius Crassus announced his own re-election, along with the appointment of 9 of his loyal supporters. There was also a major change in the nature of the power that these individuals wielded. Unlike the previous council, these decemviri would each be assigned 12 lictors on a permanent basis, and what's more, these lictors would carry axes within their fasces despite the fact that this was forbidden within the bounds of the city. And with their power not subject to appeal, this group of corrupt men quickly began to use their position to further their own ends. Prosecutions of those that opposed them grew, and any trials that were held, if they were held at all, were done so behind closed doors. Having had a taste of ultimate power, it was not long before they began to put forward the idea that they should have permanent rule. Having completed the 2 new tables, the decemviri, although obliged to step down, refused to do so, even turning to violence when necessary to hold on to their positions. And to make matters worse, now at this time when the political situation in Rome was under severe pressure, there came news that the Equi and the Sabines had reappeared and sent their forces to raid Roman and Latin territory. Rome clearly needed to formulate a response to these invasions, and the decemvirate summoned the Senate to discuss the matter. But despite this external threat, the senators were in no mood to legitimise the continuation of the decemvirate, and so, in an act of defiance, not one senator answered the call. The 10 were not so easily beaten, however. They would not back down. They stood their ground and called again for members to attend the Senate. This time, their call appeared to be more successful, as a group of senators did respond. But it was not what the decemviri were expecting, for these senators had come not to support them, but to denounce and oppose them. Resolutely, they refused to call for the levy needed to repel the invaders. Despite this senatorial resistance, the council stood firm, and very soon old ingrained ideas and behaviour patterns began to assert themselves. It was not long before the senators' anger at the decemviri began to be overcome by their fear of empowering the plebeian class. After some soul searching, they finally agreed to the proclamation of the levy. The plebeians too were fearful of consequences, but despite their misgivings at the decemvirate's power not being subject to any right of appeal, they acquiesced to the call to arms and enlisted. With the fight for power currently so earnest, the men to lead the army were chosen more on their political affiliation than their ability in the field. Rome now had an army of unwilling soldiers led by militarily inexperienced commanders. It seemed a recipe for disaster. 2 armies were raised and sent out, but they were solidly beaten by the Equi and Sabine opponents, who were then able to raid and plunder at will, whilst the forces of the Republic were obliged to withdraw and to lick their wounds. But for Appius Claudius, there was a more important matter to deal with than the raiding of a few farmsteads. Whilst Rome's armies were struggling to protect his people, he turned his attention to a matter of a more personal nature. Livy tells us that he had for some time desired a woman called Virginia. She was the daughter of a serving soldier, a centurion named Lucius Virginius, and that she was the betrothed of a man called Achilles. Appius Claudius had tried everything to win her over, including offering her immense riches. Nothing worked, however, and she had continued to refuse him. Now running out of options and growing desperate, he used his position to resort to more underhand methods. With her father not present in the city, Virginia was vulnerable. Appius Claudius took advantage of this fact by instructing one of his men to claim that Virginia was not actually a free woman, nor was she the daughter of Lucius Virginius, but that she was actually a slave. The man tasked by Appius Claudius put forward the idea that she had been born into his household and that he had simply passed her on to Virginius, but that she was still his property and he was now simply claiming her back. A shocked Virginia called upon her friends to aid her, which they did by rallying around and demanding that the matter be postponed until such time as her father could be in attendance. Appius Claudius, making a show of neutrality and feigning concern, agreed to a postponement and stated that he would summon Virginius. It was a lie, as he had no intention of issuing that summons. The friends now asked that they be allowed to take custody of Virginia, but this time Appius Claudius refused and ordered that she be placed in the custody of his stooge making the claim. but the order was rescinded when many people came forward and offered money so that she could be bailed to her family. It was, of course, not long before Virginia's lover Achilles heard of the events going on in the Forum. He quickly headed to the scene, where he was initially intercepted by a lictor. His passage was, however, not blocked for long, as he managed to attract the attention of the crowd, which pressed to allow him through. Once on the scene and engaged with events, Achilles acted quickly and arranged that his brother and one other be sent immediately to the military camp where Virginius was stationed. Desperate to prevent the centurion from being involved, Appius Claudius responded by hurriedly writing to his military colleagues in the camp, instructing them to arrest Virginius. But his message arrived too late. Virginius' father had already left and was on his way to the city. With supporters behind him, the centurion arrived in Rome and quickly turned to the people to help him in his case. But despite a sympathetic crowd, and ignoring Virginius completely, a determined Appius Claudius stood firm and now ruled that the claim was just and that Virginia was indeed a slave. The decemvir, despite the protests of Virginius, now ordered the lictors to seize Virginia and hand her over to the claimant. But they were too slow. Virginius, determined to maintain Virginia's freedom and her honour, acted before the lictors could get to her. In an act of desperation, he drew a knife and killed his daughter with his own hand. A thwarted and angry Appius Claudius now turned his ire on Virginius and ordered the lictors to arrest him. But they were prevented from doing so by an angry crowd which moved to protect the centurion and to help him to escape the city. The lictors were then ordered to pursue, but the order was immediately countermanded by the sudden intervention of two patricians, Lucius Valerius Potitus and Marcus Horatus Barbatus, who now proceeded to address the people against the actions of Appius Claudius and the decemviri. Appius Claudius tried to respond, but his voice was drowned out by the baying crowd. The tide had turned against him, and he knew it. Turning, he fled the Forum. Rome, once more, was in crisis. Its established political system had broken down and its armies had been defeated in the field. But at the same time, it had made major progress in codifying its laws and making them applicable to all. How this would all play out remained to be seen. If you like our work, please help by subscribing, pressing the bell button and commenting. And we'll see you next time on A History of Rome.